So President Trump is heralding peace in the Middle East in the wake of this memorandum of understanding, which isn't even really a final agreement to anything. It's just an agreement to cease fire for 60 days, open the Straits of Hormuz, and negotiate. But nevertheless, he's talking about how this is going to be the end of the war and we're going to move towards peace, et cetera, et cetera. What we're going to do in this video is we're going to take a look at how the Iranians are talking about this deal, how they're discussing it in their state media. Of course, we don't take what they say at face value, but we definitely use it as a window in to where they are, how they're looking downrange, and what framing they want to give things gives us important information about what they're trying to do. That's one of the big things we do on this channel. So if you're new to it and you're wondering, why am I reading Iranian state media? I'm not taking it at face value. We use it as a very valuable window into how the regime thinks. Okay, that's the intro for the newcomers. Let's take a look now. We're going to look at 6 stories. 5 of them well, 4 of them are quite short. 2 of them are a little bit longer. We're going to take a look at them all, and then we're going to draw some important conclusions from them. Okay, so this first piece is called Resistance or Negotiation? ? What led to war was resistance, not negotiation. This sentence by Iran's foreign minister might have been lost amidst the deluge of news and analysis in recent days. However, if one sentence had to be chosen to understand what is currently unfolding in Tehran, this would likely be it. And it talks about Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister. And he said he was responding to the claim that negotiations culminated in the recent war. And he offered a different narrative. He stated that the war broke out not due to dialogue, but because of Iran's resistance against the demands of the opposing side. According to him, the United States demanded zero enrichment, which Iran refused to accept, and the consequence to this confrontation was war. At first glance, this appears to be merely a response to the critics of negotiations. In reality, however, this statement signals a deeper paradigm shift. For years, Iran's foreign policy was defined by a clear dichotomy: negotiation or resistance. Within this framework, negotiation was often presented as a means to de-escalate tensions, while resistance was seen as a way to stand firm against pressures. Even inside Iran, many viewed the two as distinct and occasionally conflicting paths. Yet the recent war has seemingly altered this old equation. Okay, you hear what they're saying. Here, let me jump down, and we're not going to read every word of this. This is one of the longer pieces here. Let's read the key passages. It talks about it being an intellectual shift. In fact, what is currently taking shape in Tehran could be a redefinition of the concept of resistance. In the traditional definition, resistance was frequently tied to the rejection of negotiation. In the new definition, however, resistance means maintaining levers of pressure while negotiating. That is, negotiating without relinquishing the instruments of power. That is, engaging in dialogue without allowing the opposing side to assume that their pressures have yielded results. This explains why almost no Iranian official speaks of trusting the United States today. Even those defending a potential agreement do not base their arguments on trust. On the contrary, the core argument is that the level of mistrust is so profound that any agreement must first and foremost yield tangible and immediate results. Okay, let me explain what's going on here. In Iran right now, believe it or not, there are protests from the pro-regime faction, those who drank the Kool-Aid all these years, the 12er Shiite population who worships the Ayatollah and is all in on the regime and death to America and death to Israel. They feel like any negotiation with the great Satan, any agreement with the great Satan, is a capitulation to the great Satan. How can you give them compromises? How can you surrender anything on the nuclear program, on the other American demands? How can you give in? Remember, 12er Shiite Islam, one of the key components of the ethos of that way of thinking is resistance and resilience. Okay, their whole branch of Islam was built on a battle, in the wake of a battle that they lost when their founder was killed, but they persevered and they weren't destroyed, and they're resilient. And this whole concept of resistance runs very, very deep in their psychology. So there's actually protests that are criticizing Aragshi and Galibaf, the negotiators who came to this deal, that are calling them out as traitors for cutting a deal with the devil, with the great Satan. So what this piece is part of the kind of damage control where, and it's not just for internal consumption, but it's also externally. They don't want it to appear that they're giving into anything, that negotiating any kind of deal implies any kind of compromise, because in their worldview, compromise is not a virtue. There's no such thing as a virtuous compromise to arrive at a deal. Compromise always means you're weak. It always means that you couldn't accomplish your goals by some other means. And therefore, they have to repackage the negotiations as resistance itself. Okay? That's what this piece here is signaling. And I'm going to show you another piece that is signaling something similar. And it's an interview that was done on Iranian state media with this guy, Gari Babadi. So he's the deputy foreign minister. So look at what it says here. Deputy Foreign Minister for Legal and International Affairs, Kazem Garibabadi, says the recent Iran-U.S. Memorandum of Understanding was achieved under conditions of complete distrust. Okay, we'll get to that point also. That's a different point than I was just making, but that's right. Complete. He wants to make the point that we do not trust the Americans, emphasizing that safeguarding maximum national interest remained the guiding principle of the Iranian negotiating team. Speaking in a televised interview on Monday, that's today, Garibabadi stressed that the agreement reflects Iran's leverage derived from its military and diplomatic strength, noting that bringing the adversary to the negotiating table is itself the result of Iranians' power. You see what this is? They're worried about criticism, internal and external criticism, for the perception that they're somehow capitulating or compromising in any way. Again, if you're a Westerner, compromising to reach a deal is not something you're ashamed of. It's viewed as a virtuous move. It's not viewed that way by them. So they have to spin it that they weren't compromising, that bringing the adversary to the negotiating table is itself the result of our power. You follow? I mean, let's read further. You'll see he's going to kind of double down on this. The diplomat explained that the memorandum was finalized after extensive negotiations involving indirect mediation by Pakistan and Qatar, with additional facilitation from Switzerland for the formal signing process. He said the text was subject to long and meticulous discussions, during which Iran insisted on incorporating all its final revisions, many of which were ultimately accepted. The deputy minister confirmed that the signing ceremony is scheduled for Friday, after which implementation mechanisms will gradually begin. He underlined that Iran's commitments under the MOU are strictly conditional and reciprocal. We'll get to that in a few minutes. Iran's measures will be fully aligned with the level of compliance shown by the other side. This is a very important paragraph. We will get to it soon. It's a separate issue than the one I'm highlighting right now. He said, adding that Tehran will closely monitor implementation and respond proportionally to any violation or failure by the United States. According to him, a 60-day negotiation period will follow the signing, focusing exclusively on the nuclear file. Exclusively on the nuclear file, this is what he claims, and the lifting of sanctions, including unilateral, secondary, and international restrictions. Garibabadi further stated that Iran's negotiating positions was anchored in both diplomatic and military deterrence. See that? He noted that recent regional developments and responses by Iranian armed forces contributed to accelerating the negotiation process. In other words, our military deterrence, our military actions that we took against Israel and against Kuwait and what we were doing in the Strait of Hormuz, our diplomatic and military deterrence worked. It put us in a stronger position. Shaping the final text. Without military strength and national unity, this outcome would not have been possible, he said. See what he's doing? It's the same as what I said about the previous piece and what he said at the beginning here. They're trying very hard to make sure that their coming to an agreement with the Americans is not viewed in any way publicly as a form of compromise or retreat or capitulation. That's what this is all about. He also confirmed that the implementation of initial U.S. obligations, such as ending restrictions, ending hostilities, and releasing blocked Iranian assets, will be verified before Iran fully enters the next negotiation phase. Only after such verification, he said, will Tehran proceed with structured talks under the agreed framework. Concluding his remarks, Garibabadi reiterated that Iran's approach combines diplomacy with readiness for defense, stressing that even with agreements in place, the country remains fully prepared to counter any future threats. So you see this again, they're trying to frame that they didn't really give in. Now, the other message that we get from this piece especially is that they don't really have that much confidence that this is going to last. You see what they say here. He underlined that Iran's commitments are strictly conditional and reciprocal and will be fully aligned with the level of compliance by the Americans. Tehran will monitor implementation and respond proportionally. We have a 60-day negotiating period, and we're going to see how the Americans behave during the 60 days. Right? And then he ended off by saying that we're ready for anything. We're ready to go back to fighting. Okay, so how much confidence they have in how long this is going to last is an interesting question. Right? And you saw that in the, in the first piece we read also. Well, let me take a look. Maybe I didn't read that line. Let me go back to the first piece. Let me find the line in here. It said that many of the Iranian analysts don't believe. Here, look what it says here. Even if a temporary agreement takes shape, many Iranian officials will view it not as a political reconciliation, but as a phase in the very same long-term rivalry with the United States. They're not talking the language of resolution of this thing. That's not how they're seeing this. Okay, so that's a key message we're getting from the Iranian state media. Next, here is their official announcement of it. Memorandum of Understanding with the United States finalized. Kazem Garibabadi, Iran's deputy foreign minister, announced that the text of the Memorandum of Understanding between Iran and the United States has been finalized, will be signed Friday in Switzerland. According to Garibabadi, intensive negotiations and consultations have been underway in recent weeks, with mediation by Pakistan and Qatar. Very nice. He said that all Iran's key positions and concerns were incorporated. We saw that in the other piece. There's something added in here. The deputy foreign minister also announced two immediate developments linked to the agreement. He said that an immediate and permanent end to military operations and hostilities across multiple fronts, including Lebanon, would take effect from today. He further noted that the maritime blockade imposed on Iran would also be lifted as part of the initial measures. That could be, but stopping all the fighting in Lebanon, that is tying Israel's hands. I made a video about that yesterday. Very problematic. Emphasizing Tehran's continued distrust of the other side, Garibabadi said that Iran's approach is based not on trust in Washington, but on its military capabilities, diplomatic efforts, and domestic support. He added that a specific mechanism has been designed to monitor the implementation of commitments by the United States. We saw that in the other piece. He warned that if any shortcomings or violations are observed in the implementation of U.S. commitments, Iran will respond with corresponding measures. They don't think that this will last. And they don't want to be seen as trusting the Americans at their word. Because that looks like capitulation. That looks like, this is the great Satan. They've indoctrinated generations of their people to believe that America is evil. Addressing recent developments, Garibabadi said that events in Lebanon and the readiness of Iran's armed forces played a significant role in advancing the negotiations. In other words, it's not capitulation, it's from strength. According to him, the political and military pressure generated by these developments helped facilitate acceptance of several amendments sought by Tehran. He also revealed plans for the 60-day negotiation process to begin after the commitments are implemented by the U.S. He said participation in this phase will depend on Washington fulfilling its obligations. They see this all as testing the Americans. They can't project that they trust the Americans or that they capitulated. They have to maintain a posture that they're the ones who are testing the Americans and that they didn't capitulate. This came through their strength. That's the running theme here. The talks are expected to focus on four main issues: removal of all sanctions and UN Security Council resolutions, nuclear-related matters, the establishment of a framework for Iran's reconstruction, and the creation of a mechanism to monitor compliance by both parties. He concluded by stressing that Iran did not agree to the memorandum until all of its key concerns had been incorporated. Negotiations continued until shortly before the announcement of the agreement's completion. Why is that important? To show that they were driving a hard bargain, that they weren't just readily agreeing, that they kept it going to the final hour. Okay, once the document is officially released, the public will be able to assess the balance between the commitments undertaken and the achievements secured by each side. And then we have this interview, which is also from today. Mahmoud Vaezi, former chief of staff to Iran's ex-president Hassan Rouhani, has described the recent memorandum of understanding between Iran and the United States as a negotiation from a position of strength, stressing that the agreement was carefully reviewed, clause by clause, across all sectors of the Islamic Republic. In an exclusive interview with IRNA on Monday, which is official state media, Vaezi said that amid regional tensions and periods of military and political pressure, Iran managed to maintain internal cohesion and put forward realistic proposals that ultimately shaped the direction of the negotiations. He emphasized that the negotiating team, backed fully by the state and the public, firmly defended national interests with clarity and resolve. Same messaging again. Addressing the broader geopolitical context, he described the neither war nor peace condition as a tool often used to gradually weaken countries through sustained economic security and psychological pressure. He's referring to what the Americans have been doing, what they're calling neither war nor peace. That's a phrase they've used in a number of their pieces of messaging, of their articles in their state media over the last couple months. That's how they've been describing this current situation of the ceasefire with the blockade, neither war nor peace. And what they're showing is that they withstood it. He said Iran rejected unjust conditions proposed by the other side and succeeded in shifting the negotiating framework through political and diplomatic resilience. Resilience is like I said, it's one of their highest virtues. It's the whole origin story of their Shiite faith is built on this resilience. And that's why they declare victory when they just survive. And that shows resilience. It shows that God is on your side. Someone more powerful than you tried to destroy you, but they backed off at the end because you resisted and you were resilient. That to them is like ultimate virtue. Again, it's a sign from God that you won. We look at them declaring victory, and we laugh because, oh, their navy's destroyed, their army's destroyed. Look at all the damage we did to them. They do not evaluate things that way. Resilience. You see this over and over again. He also highlighted the role of regional mediators, particularly Pakistan and Qatar. Okay, very nice. According to him, the final MOU was largely aligned with Iran's initial proposal, reflecting the country's negotiating leverage. That's a key point. In other words, the Americans changed. They moved their red lines. We didn't move ours, which might be true. Look, that's the way Westerners negotiate. The way Westerners negotiate is the longer it goes on, the more they want to deal, the more they're willing to find room for compromise, and they view compromise as a virtue. The other side, the Iranians, view compromise as failure, as shameful, and they just dig in and dig in and dig in. I also saw something that was laughable. I was watching a Fox News clip, and Trey Yinks, their reporter there, said, the Iranians didn't get everything they wanted because they demanded that the American troops all withdraw, and they didn't get that. And I'm sitting there thinking, how naive can you be? Of course, the Iranians include demands that they know the Americans won't agree to, because then when those aren't included, it gives the illusion of them giving in on something. But they never thought they'd get that anyway. You think they ever realistically thought that America would withdraw all of its personnel from the region? Of course they threw in demands like that. They always throw. This is a standard negotiating tactic in the Middle East. Throw in some demands that the other side is never going to give into. And then in the negotiation, the other side, when they say, no, we can never give into that, and then you say, fine, I'll capitulate on that, it looks like that you're being flexible. It's a joke. Anyway, he further emphasized the importance of balanced media coverage, saying national media should provide a platform for diverse expert perspectives rather than amplify a single narrative. He pointed to the recent interview of Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi as a positive example, helping to clarify the situation and calm public opinion. You see what's going on. Like I said to you, this is not being reported in Western media, but there are protests. They're not going to report them either. Okay, so you're not going to see them in Iranian state media, but I've seen it in other Middle Eastern media. I saw it in Israeli media, saw video footage of them. There are protests going on in the streets of Tehran against this deal, framing it as capitulation, framing it as compromise, which again is a bad thing in their culture. Okay, and we already saw this story. And then here's this interview that Abbas Araghchi gave. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has stressed the U.S. responsibility regarding the implementation of the MOU with Iran, as well as a complete halt to the Israeli regime's attacks against Lebanon. He made the remarks in separate phone calls with Turkish, Iraq, and Egyptian counterparts Hakan Fidan, Fuad Hussein, and Badr Abdelhadi. He reviewed the process and provisions of the Islamabad understanding, that's the MOU, and he complimented the mediators. Iran and the United States, after announcing a ceasefire on April 8th, began negotiations. The text of the Memorandum of Understanding that was signed, the foundation of which was Iran's 14-point proposal at the very beginning of the ceasefire, was reviewed multiple times over the past 60 days in the capitals of the two countries. Despite all the pressures, the violation of the ceasefire, and the repeated changes of position by the United States, Iran persisted in its stances. There it is again, the resilience, the never backing down, the not compromising. After signing the MOU text, the two countries will put a series of intensive negotiations on their agenda over the next 60 days in order to reach a comprehensive agreement on the disputed issues. So, two key takeaways from everything that we've just seen. Let me sum this up. The two key takeaways are, number one, resilience, resistance. Negotiation does not mean compromise. It does not mean capitulation. We didn't give in. Okay, that's so important to them. That's key narrative point number one for them. Number two is they don't really view this as a long-term deal. They see this thing falling apart. They're already messaging that they don't trust the Americans, and they're going to watch very carefully about all the implementation, and that any sign of anything that's not being implemented to their liking, they're going to take action. That's the language they're talking. They're talking assuming that this thing falls apart. Okay. Last thing I want to show you is a very unusual article on WANA. Very unusual. And this was from yesterday. And it says, and I'll tell you what this is, why it's so unusual. It says, reopening the strait, diplomacy or lost leverage. And this is so unusual because this is Iranian state media, and they're running a piece that is critical of the deal. And I was waiting for the piece to like turn around in the middle, and it doesn't. It's just critical of the deal. Watch this. While some analytical circles have discussed the potential implications of any new agreement between Iran and the United States, a number of Iranian analysts have warned against relinquishing certain strategic levers at the outset of such arrangements. Now, what are they talking about? They're talking about the Straits of Hormuz. Within this context, one such Iranian analyst, Fouad Izadi, a university professor and expert on international affairs, has examined a reported 14-point draft memorandum of understanding between Iran and the United States and cautioned about its possible consequences. His full argument is presented below. Opening the Strait of Hormuz would give the U.S. and Israel an opportunity to rebuild their capabilities and launch another attack. The proposed memorandum of understanding would mean, number one, reopening the Strait of Hormuz at the very first stage would effectively solve many of Trump's economic and political challenges. It's true. Countries do not normally hand over their most important source of leverage to the other side at the beginning of negotiations. This is a criticism. It's saying, wait a second, if we open the Straits of Hormuz, that's our number one leverage point. If we hand it over right at the beginning, before the 60 days of negotiations, before everything else, we've given away our most important leverage right at the start. Bad idea. Number two, once the Strait of Hormuz is reopened and oil prices decline, U.S. strategic oil reserves would be replenished. The resulting breathing space would allow American and Israeli military systems to be repaired and rebuilt. Three, this would amount to a repetition of the cycle of attack, ceasefire, negotiation, and attack again. The hostility of those who, in this view, martyred the supreme leader of the Islamic Revolution has not diminished, the Americans and Israelis. Finding a pretext to withdraw from such an agreement would not be difficult for Trump. Trump should not be allowed to claim that the cost of a second military strike against Iran would be manageable. The United States and Israel would use this period of respite to prepare for future attacks. Planning for a second coup attempt would also be on the agenda. You see how much they do not trust the Americans. Okay, but they're also saying here, wait a second, a period of calm and a period like this where we ease up on the Strait of Hormuz, this allows the United States and Israel to prepare for future attacks. Number four, the principal sanctions against Iran are congressional sanctions, not executive sanctions. As a result, Trump could later claim that he lacks the authority to compel Congress to lift them and therefore fail to deliver on promised sanctions relief. Number 5, since 2015, under the provisions of the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act, any agreement with Iran requires congressional approval. Given the influence of the Israel lobby, Congress is unlikely to vote in favor of lifting sanctions on Iran. Netanyahu's influence among both Democratic and Republican lawmakers is greater than Trump's. That's an interesting statement. Proposed solutions. Number 1, look at this. Please do not sign this memorandum. Number 2, please publish a list of desalination facilities. Those are the facilities that provide drinkable water to all of the Gulf states who don't have drinkable water. They're all desert countries that are on saltwater seas. So they have these massive desalination plants, and that's how they drink. So, and Iran has always been threatening to bomb the desalination plants of the Gulf states if they make a false move. So please publish a list of desalination facilities and oil installations in the region that Iran considers potential targets. In the event of another attack on Iran, these facilities should be destroyed in such a way that rebuilding them would take at least 2 years. Then he explains that limited damage is not enough of a deterrence. So it has to be enough that it would take years to rebuild them. Alternative routes to the Strait of Hormuz should be prioritized among Iran's potential targets. Please do not reopen the Strait of Hormuz for at least another 2 months. Over the past 3 months, Iran has sold more than $30 billion worth of oil, didn't know that, which is sufficient to manage the country's economy for the next 2 months. Please do not forget the option of charging transit fees for passage through the Strait of Hormuz. According to international estimates, revenue from such fees could exceed twice the value of Iran's oil sales. This, rather than remaining under the illusion that sanctions will be lifted, constitutes part of the solution to the country's economic challenges. And then that's how the piece ends. This is absolutely fascinating. It's a piece, and it's labeled as must read on Iranian state media that is arguing against the Memorandum of Understanding on the basis of the fact that surrendering the Strait of Hormuz, opening the Strait of Hormuz, surrenders their key point of leverage, and they don't trust the Americans, and they should basically it advises not only not signing the deal, but publishing a list of potential targets should there be any false move by the other side. So to sum up this video, the way the Iranians are talking about this whole deal is projecting lack of trust of the Americans, and that they want to make sure that it is understood that they did not capitulate, that they did not give in, that they're all about resistance and resilience. What this means going forward is that we should not expect a smooth negotiation. Okay, they are going to be digging in on every front, at every turn. They know that Trump does not want to go back to kinetic action under any circumstances. They're going to use that to their benefit. They're going to poke Israel in Lebanon, because every time Israel does anything in Lebanon, if Trump criticizes Israel, that's good for Iran. That drives a deeper wedge between Israel and the United States, and that's part of their strategy of telling Hezbollah to attack Israel. So these are some of the things that we need to keep an eye out for in the days ahead. I hope you found this helpful. Please like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching. God bless.